Hello and welcome to Season 3 of the Push podcast. My name's Jack Ferguson, an experienced brand strategist with a science background. In my career, I've worked across 25 industries and helped increase client and employer revenue by over $40 million. I will be your host. This season of the podcast is essential listening for marketers looking to better sell their strategies to stakeholders, get client buy-in, and keep internal teams engaged. Thanks for being here, and don't forget to subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on. Hello and welcome to Season 3, Episode 73 of the Push podcast. Today I'm going to talk about who you are as a marketer and what stages of growth you're likely to be suited to. I'll note here that I'm talking about marketers specifically and not tactical experts like copywriters or designers in this episode. Think more along the lines of brand managers, marketing directors, those type of roles. The focus will also be more on in-house marketers, not those who work in agencies. So that's some of the groundwork for the episode. But in my experience, different marketers are suited to different companies and different stages of a company's life cycle. I often make an argument, and I'll continue to make the argument, that one of the most important things a marketer can do in their career is pick the right company to work for or the right brand to work for. There are a lot of things beyond our control, so we should go into any brand with our eyes wide open about this. Execution can't fix a bad market choice. In every brand, we're a cog in the machine. So we need to make sure that we pick the right machine. I'm breaking this up into 4 growth stages that companies go through, and I'll compare the 4 stages I'm talking about today to the famous 5 steps in the Adizes corporate organizational life cycle, Adizes being ADEEZUS. Now, I like the Adizes model, but I just don't find it quite as relevant to marketers, so I modify it slightly with 4 stages that I think are relevant to marketers. But my 4 stages effectively collapse the first 3 stages of the Adizes model into 2. If you want to learn more about the Adizes model, though, I have included a link to that in the description of this episode. I'll also note we're talking about brands that are growing in this episode, but not all brands grow. In fact, most don't grow in any given year. So if a company's in decline, if a category is in decline, we should really be looking at companies like that with a skeptical lens. Us doing a good job in those companies can look like the company just doesn't go backwards as fast as it would have without us. Let's start off with the first growth stage, which I call discover and validate fit. At this stage, you're trying to prove desirability, you're trying to prove early traction. In tech, you may even be pre-revenue. They're often very informal companies to work for. They're often very chaotic. There's a perceived higher risk, and you're working off short-term plans for the most part. So month to month is normal at this stage of growth. Often, I don't think a full-time marketer is actually right for this stage, especially in B2B, and particularly for high consideration purchases. So for lower consideration, maybe you would want a marketer earlier on. So if you're selling accounting software that it's just a business owner needs to sign off on and it's relatively low priced, sure, having a marketing person internally earlier makes some sense. But if the sales cycles are a lot longer than that, the company's effectively employing a marketer to do trials where they don't get an answer for a very long time. It's very messy getting to product market fit, and that's what you're trying to do at this stage of growth. But with shorter buying and consideration cycles, you can test faster and get information in quicker. Companies of this size can do well if they instead use a consultant plus an internal part-time marketing coordinator. That's often a structure that I've seen work well. So a senior consultant can help augment the founding team's expertise. If there isn't a marketer in the founding team, an internal marketing coordinator could execute part-time on the strategy. But the other option at this stage is to use an agency, but I would say not just any agency. You'd have to use one designed and built for this size of business and the needs it has. So an agency that knows they need to do a lot of iterative testing and pivoting quickly, Jared Doyle's Fractal agency is a good option here. So those are a few things I see happen at this stage of growth. By my estimates, less than 5% of marketers in Australia work for companies of this size. But for those who are there, you have to be someone who's comfortable with a lot of change and chaos. Long-term plans are not very useful here, and there's no real guarantee on when you'll get to product market fit, if you will at all. There's a lot of uncertainty at this stage, and you need to be someone who can handle that. You're also likely to need a tactical skill set or two, like copywriting, for example. You'd have to get your hands dirty a lot. These companies need to be able to go from idea to implementation very quickly. So it's best if the internal marketer can do some of the tactical heavy lifting to bring something to life. But I've made it sound horrible so far. But if you are someone who is driven by having control over the marketing department, you like trying a lot of things, this can be a stage of growth where you get to do all that stuff. You can be most creative with your solutions at this stage. There's no bureaucracy, or there's not much bureaucracy usually at this stage of growth. There's not much brand heritage to violate. More options are theoretically on the table earlier on in a brand's life. And it's also the stage of growth that you can negotiate for equity, which is something that I think marketers need to talk about more and more, think about more and more. Finance people are really getting involved in this. A lot of CFOs, fractional CFOs, finance people who are working at smaller companies are asking for profit share and equity and whatnot. We can start looking at doing that as well. But that's stage one. Now we'll talk about stage two, which is building a repeatable growth engine. This is what this stage is all about of growth. So you're trying to build out a repeatable go-to-market. And a lot of small businesses sit in this space. You have to be happy to wear a lot of hats as a marketer. So there's less chaos on determining, say, product market fit compared to the previous stage of growth, but there is more chaos when it comes to scale and building the team and being able to handle more customers and onboard more customers. If you have a product, ship to more customers. So there's overall less chaos in the previous stage, but more than the following two stages. I think this suits a marketer who likes to systemize something from nothing and who likes autonomy, because you still have quite a bit of that at this stage. Again, you still need some tactical prowess. Copywriting is a useful skill here. If it's a B2B brand, even sales can be very useful, the sales skill. You can have longer term plans at this size of growth in comparison to the previous stage, but plans generally are advised to be shorter term than in future stages. This is a stage of growth as well that you need to be decent at pricing. You're starting to get more and more customers. Your pricing's starting to get somewhat anchored at this point as a brand. I think it is best if a marketer at this stage of growth is really good at pricing. I mean, marketers at every stage of growth should be good at pricing, but as a company gets bigger, as you're probably already aware, we often get left out of the pricing conversations. But I think that's not acceptable at this stage of growth. It's critical here. At this stage of growth, you still have to be quite adaptable. You might not have a locked-in role, so you still have to wear a few hats and be happy to make sure things get done and get things over the line. And you have to be happy to do what's needed at times as well. I go back to my career and I think about the one business that I was basically purely operational as head of marketing, as we opened about 20 odd restaurants in 1 to 1.5 years, which was 800% growth or something over that time, something wild like that. But there was not much room for strategy then. We just had to get things done. It's also the stage of growth where the brand is going to look at whether they want to keep scaling. So you may need to be able to position the business to scale at this point. Speaking of scale, I call the third stage of growth scale and expand. So here we're often needing to get more distribution, or the brand's needing to get more distribution, more channels, sometimes more geographies, and the product scope or the service scope often continues to expand at this point as well. Most marketers work at this size of company. I estimate 35% of internal marketers in Australia are working for a company of this size. You need to be good at risk management, or getting at least better at risk management than the previous two stages, because the company and the brand is now getting to a point where it actually has something to lose. There's some equity built. There's some heritage built. The core competence is starting to get a little bit more boxed in. It's not just about scaling at this point either. It's about defending and protecting to an extent as well. Mass media is coming to the forefront. Light buyers are often becoming more important at this stage of growth. You're able to build longer term plans, but the company's also becoming more introspective. And that tends to happen as an organization grows. More meetings, more stakeholders come to the party. There's more time spent looking internally at a company of this size than the previous two, rather than externally looking at the market, which can be very frustrating for us as marketers, because as an organization gets bigger, the forces pull everyone's attention inwards. Us marketers need to continue to look at the market, obviously, but most other people in the company spend their time looking at other people in the company. And that is the inertia that we unfortunately have to deal with. The bigger it gets, the more stakeholders there are, the more those internal forces pull on a marketer. So that's the most common stage of growth that marketers work for. I'll speak to now the fourth stage, what I call defend and renew. So at this stage, you're probably working for a massive brand. I estimate about 25% of marketers in Australia are working for these big brands. And while there's a lot of marketers working there, 25% is a chunk. There's not a whole heap of companies this size, which means that marketing teams are bigger within these larger companies. So less companies, but bigger marketing teams, which is contributing to the 25% I mentioned there. But the thing is, here at this size, you're often starting to spend a lot of time protecting what you have and re-energizing. Especially if the market has now matured and could be saturated, it's very hard to grow from there. You work very hard to stay in the same place. Companies of this size often face massive, continuous customer churn and defection due to population shifts, lifestyle changes, competition, and especially in B2C. So even to keep penetration flat, some companies have to acquire millions of new or lapsed light buyers every year at this point, just to replace all those who left. And yes, these companies have massive budgets, but they're often keeping the brand from collapsing under the weight of what I'd call natural market erosion. You're also likely to be chasing incremental gains at this stage of growth. So there's probably a lot of things that you're trying to get a little win out of and improve a little bit in, but more things are staying in place than they are moving. Risk management is becoming your job. Innovation is harder at this level. You do look over long-term horizons, but those forces pulling your attention inward as a marketer are just getting stronger and stronger. So that's what I'd say about that stage of growth. There are benefits. You are starting to benefit from, say, the double jeopardy law, which states that smaller brands have fewer buyers and slightly lower loyalty, while bigger brands have obviously far more buyers and slightly higher loyalty. You've got brand heritage and a brand equity that you've inherited. Ironically, you don't have to be as strong usually at pricing at this level. Companies of this size often have marketing and the go-to-market so fragmented. My research has indicated that a lot of marketers at this size are just simply not included in the pricing conversation, or they contribute to it slightly. The other thing is at this size, core competence is set. So even if you had creative ideas about what the company should do or what you think the brand should do, they'd be very hard to bring to life. Too many things are set and are hard to change at this level. So I think it's a good idea to look at this size of company as defend and renew. That's what you're going to do. You're going to look inwards more than outwards, but the money will probably be better at this size. Pros and cons, that's how I see it. So the 4 stages of growth that I think marketers can look at is 1, discover and validate fit. 2, building a repeatable growth engine. 3, scale and expand. 4, defend and renew. So some things I'd recommend asking yourself as a marketer to work out where you think you should work is, how much uncertainty can you handle? The smaller the brand or the more early stage, usually the more uncertainty, in particular when it comes to getting to product market fit. That may be changing though. If you've listened to my episode with Matt Georgeson from this season, he talks about how a lot of bigger companies are starting to fail faster now than 50 to 80 years ago. So innovation may actually be becoming more and more important for bigger companies, and maybe they're going to stop having a choice not to be like that as demand shifts faster. Another question I'd ask is, how much creative input do you want? The smaller the company, usually the more creative input you get. How much do you like to improve existing business as usual and go after incremental gains versus making larger changes and taking on perhaps more risk, or at least more perceived risk? Obviously, business as usual is more set in stone the bigger the company gets. How much money do you want? So there's more opportunity for higher salaries at bigger companies in general, but there's also more opportunity for ownership and equity with smaller brands. We should look into this more. Marketers, this is an opportunity for us to follow finance and not just think about being a worker for a smaller brand, but also becoming part owner. How much are you prepared to focus on stakeholder management? As the companies get bigger, the demands on this are greater, and the job changes in a way that you become more introspective by default, unless you can deny that inertia. Also, how important is it to have a well-known brand on your resume? That is something else to consider here. And it's certainly a very valid approach to a career, in my opinion, to get a big brand on your resume early on and just use that for the rest of your career. Those are some things for you to consider. Thanks for listening in today. I appreciate your attention and your time. I'll be in your ears again soon. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Push Podcast. Please remember to subscribe, and if you are enjoying the episodes, please leave a review of the podcast on your platform of choice. It really helps to build the podcast credibility and to help others find this type of information.